Brothers and sisters, today we will see Exodus chapters 9 and 11. Exodus 9 tells the story of the fifth and sixth plagues that struck Egypt. After Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go, God sent a plague of livestock disease. All the animals owned by the Egyptians, including horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, and sheep, became sick and died. However, none of the animals belonging to the Israelites were affected. Pharaoh still did not relent, so God sent the sixth plague, boils. The Egyptians, including Pharaoh and his officials, were covered in painful boils. Even the magicians, who had been able to replicate some of God's miracles, were unable to stand before Moses due to the severity of their boils. Despite the suffering and devastation, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to let the Israelites leave Egypt. Exodus 9 highlights the continued display of God's power and Pharaoh's stubbornness. It demonstrates God's ability to distinguish between the Egyptians and the Israelites and showcases Pharaoh's refusal to acknowledge God's authority. The chapter sets the stage for the remaining plagues and the eventual liberation of the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. Exodus 10 describes the seventh and eighth plagues that afflicted Egypt. God instructed Moses to go to Pharaoh once again and warn him of the consequences if he continued to refuse to let the Israelites go. Moses warned Pharaoh that locusts would swarm over the land and devour all the remaining crops and vegetation. Pharaoh's officials urged him to let the Israelites go, realizing the severity of the situation. So, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said they could go worship their God in the wilderness, but only the men could go, leaving their families behind. However, Moses insisted that everyone, including their children and livestock, must go, as they were to observe a religious festival to honor God. Pharaoh became angry and refused to let them all leave. Then God brought the eighth plague upon Egypt, a dense and palpable darkness that covered the entire land for 3 days. The darkness was so thick that people couldn't see each other or move from their places. Yet again, Pharaoh called Moses and said that the Israelites could go, but they must leave their livestock behind. However, Moses insisted that they needed their livestock for sacrifices and offerings, and not a hoof would be left behind. Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he refused to let the Israelites go. Exodus 10 showcases God's power over nature and Pharaoh's continued resistance. It highlights the escalating intensity of the plagues and Pharaoh's unwillingness to release the Israelites from slavery. The chapter sets the stage for the final plagues and the ultimate deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. Exodus 11 tells us about the final plague that struck Egypt. God spoke to Moses and told him that one more plague would come upon Pharaoh and the Egyptians. After this plague, Pharaoh would finally let the Israelites go from their slavery in Egypt. God instructed Moses to speak to the Israelites and tell each family to ask their Egyptian neighbors for silver and gold items as a sign of their impending departure. God had given the Israelites favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they willingly gave their valuable possessions to the Israelites. Then Moses went to Pharaoh and told him that at midnight, every firstborn son in Egypt would die. This included the son of Pharaoh, who would be the greatest loss for him and his people. Moses warned Pharaoh that there would be a great cry throughout the land because of the death of the firstborn. After speaking with Pharaoh, Moses left his presence in great anger. God explained to Moses that he would perform this plague so that Pharaoh and the Egyptians would know that he is the Lord, and there is no one like him in all the earth. Even though Pharaoh would continue to refuse to let the Israelites go, God's power and judgment would be revealed to all. Exodus 11 marks the culmination of the plagues and sets the stage for the dramatic events of the following chapter, the Passover. It emphasizes God's sovereignty and his determination to free the Israelites from bondage, even in the face of Pharaoh's stubbornness. Dear brothers and sisters, we will continue the next chapters in the next video. Stay blessed. Amen. Kindly subscribe and share. Thank you and good night.